Welcome again to another episode of One Door at a Time, Concentric Educational Solutions podcast, where we just speak about the issues affecting students and families across the country. Obviously, we've been diving deep into chronic absenteeism and just about student engagement. But I have the amazing pleasure and privilege to welcome Hedy Chang, the Executive Director and Founder of Attendance Works, who has been doing this work and this journey for many years. Hedy, you're in this space, you're a trailblazer and a groundbreaker, and just I can't say enough about the work that and the foundation that you led, and you pioneered it way before it was even a buzzword. So just I want to thank you. We don't get this opportunity often. Your schedule is very, very hectic, but thank you for taking the time just to stop by and have a conversation about it.
Well, David, it is a pleasure to be here. And I know that this work and the progress we've made, though there's a lot more to be done, but wasn't made by myself alone. It's because of all the allies in the field who work on this together with me. And David, you are absolutely one of them. So it is my pleasure and privilege to join you today.
So how did you get, with doing this, you're what, over a decade into this work?
Longer than that. I'm getting old, David.
Yes. But like, how did this come about? Like, what were you thinking with Attendance Works and how it started?
Yeah. So this work started because in 2006,
Oh, wow.
a guy named Ralph Smith, then the senior VP of the Annie Casey Foundation, asked me if I would take a look at whether kids missing too much school and starting in kindergarten was a reason why they weren't reading at the end of third grade. And Ralph actually had been the chief operating officer of the Philly schools before the Casey Foundation. And he's just a data nerd, I don't know. He calls me a data nerd, but he is too, and he had noticed trends in Philly schools when he was there and just never had a chance to really follow up on that. And he was at that point, trying to look at whether he could launch the campaign for grade level reading and get the country focused and shifted away from just thinking about high school graduation to, hey, we got to do this much, much earlier. And if kids aren't reading by the end of third grade, then, we need to take a different look at what's happened to them. And Ralph, by the way, successfully, I think has really helped to move the needle on getting us to not think just about older kids, but to think about third grade reading. But as part of that, he wanted to understand how much attendance and addressing poor attendance might be part of that pathway to third grade reading. In 2006, when Ralph asked me, he asked me to figure out what did we know about the data, what did we know about best practices, and two things I will say. One is on a very personal level. At that time, I had my kids in a pretty mixed income public education, elementary school. A pretty mixed income elementary school, and I did that pretty intentionally because I felt like in order to be a full citizen of this country, you need to know people from lots of different backgrounds. And I wanted my kids to have that experience growing up. And they did. And we were in this amazing public elementary school with a great principal, a strong community that we were helping to create. But one of the little boys in my oldest son's class was on, he was living in public housing with his mom. Mom was trying to get off of welfare. Born same date, same year as my kid was. I was really involved in the after school program in the school. I knew this kid was a creative, thoughtful, bright little boy. And in second grade, just about the time that Ralph asked me to take this on, this little boy's mom passed away, probably because she never had access to decent health care. And I saw his attendance challenge. I saw him going to Aunt Mary's and having trouble in the foster care system. And even though we had a caring school, we didn't have the tools to really support this little boy. And so when Ralph asked me, when I take a look at this, I'm like, absolutely, because I was also frustrated and angry because I felt like, how can you not let kids who have equal potential actually have equal opportunity to realize it? And in this case, so that, and I will say, unfortunately, this little boy, much later on, he's passed away. So
Wow.
we
I
know, and so sometimes it's anger that makes you
yes.
change things. But to go back to the story of Casey Foundation, what I realized in 2006 was we didn't even know that we had to look at this issue. We were just looking at unexcused absences. We were taking attendance paper and pencil.
Yes.
No
Yes.
one
Yes. I
even
remember.
like calculated, no one had any way of noticing, whether a kid was missing too much school. And because we looked at only unexcused absences, truancy, we had no idea that our babies were struggling. And
Yep.
this was about the challenges that their families were facing. And I remember finally getting some data sets from some local districts that had started to create longitudinal student systems. And one big district in the Midwest, I won't name who it is, I looked at it and said, oh my God, 40% of their kindergartners are chronically absent. It's 6,000 kindergartners. And I wrote Ralph and said, this isn't a little issue. This is a huge issue. And we are not
Absolutely.
paying any attention to it. And then by 2008, I had published Present Engagement Accounted For, which was the
Yes.
first time saying, hey, we think this is about 1 out of 10 kids nationwide, starting in kindergarten and first, that's facing this challenge. And then by 2010, Ralph had launched a campaign for grade level reading. He wanted me to be moving at scale. And I realized, oh my God, I think I need an entity because
Yeah.
and we have to do this work at scale. And that's what led to the launch of Attendance Works.
Well, I mean, one, that the story about the student in your child's your child's class, that's powerful. It's unfortunate, but like you said, like there's a lot of the issues that are impacting our students. I'm really, it's powerful that it sounds like a simple question that he asked, but that it was such a profound question and kind of launched the past 15 years. What have you seen change since you've been doing this
Well,
in
one
public
thing
education?
I think, there's education, and first of all, we now have data, and
Okay.
every school district, what happened in 2010, we mandated having longitudinal student data systems at the state level, which then meant all the local school districts were going to have it in order to submit to the state.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, people had data systems. A lot of them, most of them, the majority of state systems actually did collect attendance data, but they didn't do anything with it. It just went in and never came out, and no one ever looked at it. That started shifting. And that was the thing that we were able to work on the first, 6 years of Attendance Works existence. We would have these conversations. We think you have a chronic absence problem. No, I don't have a chronic absence problem. I think all my kids show up to school. No, this is not an issue. And if people wanted me to talk, by the way, at the time, I was always like, I only come if you will take your data and you will crunch your data, and then we can have a conversation. So that was like a precondition of working with us or talking to us. You got to take your data and crunch it. When we first started this work, one state had sort of chronic absence data, and that was actually Maryland, David, where you live,
Oh yeah.
and that was because Nancy Grasmick had some thought that knowing how many kids missed 20 days or missed less than 5 days would be important, which I think is helpful, and it was good to give some sense. But one thing is that it was only Maryland that did that. And I'm also not sure that when you use the 20-day metrics, it always works well, because people go, oh, David missed 19 days, maybe you better do something about it. So he doesn't get to the 20th day. I want people to notice when David missed 2 days, and then we can support it. And so what happened, though, with only Maryland had it, that was in 2006, 7. Now, chronic absence data is on the state website of at least 48 states in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So
when you started, did you find that there was a hesitation or reluctance, or just not understanding?
oh, they just didn't understand. Of course, we pay attention to attendance. We're looking at average daily attendance. We're looking at truancy. What do you mean there's some other way we should look at it? And then in California, we had this huge argument because we didn't have chronic absence in our longitudinal student data system. And the Department of Finance is like, well, we pay based on average daily attendance. Of course we have it. I'm like, no, it's not for individual students. You're looking at it for the district level. And we had this huge argument about whether or not this was something that we already had. There was just total confusion.
And so when you start peeling back those layers and working with the states, and you were giving them showing them this new thing.
Well, and the
not
work didn't start with the states, David. We actually started working at local levels, and also
at the local level.
People like Baltimore City Schools, when Dr. Alonzo was there,
Yes.
He took this on. New York City took this on. In the early days, and I remember going to talking to it was some National Educational Association. This was in like 2008, where they basically said, you think you're gonna add an attendance metric? I don't care how good it is, but yet another unfunded education metric that we're gonna have to then work on? No way, lady, basically, that we have already too much to do. And at that point, I realized that mandating it, this is not the kind of work that you mandate. This is the kind of the work that you need the coalition, the willing, who understands the value of the metric to take on. So how we did this was we started working in districts across the country, not tons of them, but enough of them, so that we could show that if you looked at your data in a helpful way, monitored your reports, took a positive, engaging, supportive approach to reaching out to kids and families, you could come up with solutions and improve attendance. And we were able to show that in places we were working in Arkansas, we were working a little bit in Maryland, we were working in California, we were working in Iowa. And by the time the federal discussion about the Every Student Succeeds Act rolled around, we had these proof points in a very diverse set of, both politically and regionally different types of communities. And so we actually don't lobby, but when ESSA was in the help committee and they were kind of deciding in conference committee, did it move forward? It got added in by colleagues of ours. And I remember at the time, there was this conversation they had with the members of the committee and said, or staffers, and said, should we be galvanizing the field to say something about the importance of adding this metric? And they said, no one's actually saying too much about it. I think you should keep your mouth shut. If you have people notice that you're adding in a metric, they may say, hey, we don't like it. Just keep your mouth shut, and it'll probably stay in. And that it was the keep your mouth shut strategy. And lo and behold, then when ESSA was passed, it required everyone to report on chronic absence as part of your federal reporting requirements for data. But then if you were going to use it as an accountability metric, that was really up to whether or not states wanted to do that. And by that time, we had something called the Network for Advancing State Attendance Policy and Practice, which still operates today. It meets 4 to 5 times a year, really 4 times now, where we have states share strategies with each other, we have researchers share, and we also get input on how we can be helpful. And I remember at the time, we went to them and said, hey, you're developing your ESSA plans. We think chronic absence would be a great metric. Would it be helpful to produce some materials? And this was probably in, I don't know, April or May. And they said, and we were launching our national attendance awareness campaign. So I had said to these state colleagues, I said, we can get at this after we launch the campaign. And they said, well, if you want to influence October, when you're done with your campaign, that's way too late. You need to gather something in
Yes,
August if you're going to
absolutely.
influence whether we adopt chronic absence as a metric. So we then said, okay, better listen to the field about what timing works. We redid our schedules and we made sure that we came out with this policy brief, our top pick, chronic absence,
Yeah.
our top pick. And then we got that out and it armed all of our colleagues who weren't necessarily in charge of they weren't in charge of their agencies. They're like 3 or 4 levels down, but it gave them a tool that they could go advocate with. And then lo and behold, 36 states plus Washington, D.C. chose to include chronic absence as an accountability metric in their state plans, which then starts to drive local data systems in a different way, because now folks are paying attention to it. They got to do it for their state. They're going to come up with local data systems. So then, now that it's required as part of your state report cards, you're getting it onto state websites, which means then the public can take a look at the data and hold folks accountable and see what's happening around chronic absence in a different way. So that was all kind of being set in motion pre-pandemic. Then pandemic happens.
And that's what I was going to ask you. What were those questions coming to you when, when they realized that this was going to be, when I say they, educators, society at large realized that, hey, we're probably not coming back next week or even next month in person. What were some of those conversations like? Were they asking?
Well, my big worry is people stop taking attendance at all.
Yes.
If you think about March 2020.
Yes.
And now, okay, what everyone thought was the maybe elongated spring break is not.
Yeah, remember that? Yes.
We're not back. And everyone got really big on, school meals, which is important, making sure kids are fed, connecting to kids. But people didn't even have decent enrollment data, like not enrollment, but they lacked data to contact kids and families because we didn't.
Yes, absolutely.
So they couldn't even find kids and families.
Yes.
Much less could they take attendance in any way in any virtual learning. No one knew even what that was. So I will say at the end of what we started getting worried is that people weren't going to use attendance data at all. So in that spring, what we were trying to tell people is you ought to use your first semester data to know the kids who are you most need to do outreach for. Because if they were chronically absent the first semester, they're probably still struggling with issues that might be affecting them even when they are home. And if you can't reach a kid, you better get out there and find those kids. And
absolutely.
and then we, at the end of that year, decided we needed to start to assess what was happening with state policy and practice. That's when we started, I think, to do a policy scan, because we wanted to make sure that states would start reinstating that they would start taking attendance on a daily basis. You couldn't even take that for granted anymore.
That was going to happen. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. One of the things that we found is that, and I'm glad that you've brought so much awareness to this, is that the foundation of anything in school is just attendance. I mean, it sounds so simple, but you just have to be present. You have to be engaged. What are some of the things that you would recommend for districts because we talk about this whole issue about student engagement? What are some of the suggestions that you would have for districts, states, about keeping students engaged? And so
first of all, we have to recognize that the high levels of chronic absence are a sign that we are not effectively engaging kids and their families and helping them know that school's a place they need and ought to want to be, because it's motivating, it's going to get them to a different future. This is not about blaming folks, but saying this is a moment to both question whether we are engaging enough and our kids facing challenges in their community that may not allow them to get to school. And so It's interesting. I think, like, you can even see the New York Times today,
Yes. Yeah.
the article that came out, and this question of whether or not somehow the trust and faith in school has been broken in a certain kind of way. And I think that's really important for schools and districts to take a hard look at. When I see districts that really have maintained good attendance and high chronic absence, it's because they've built, one, they are partnering with their teachers. So they're
Yes.
teachers who are the front line. Teachers are the only people who get to see kids and families every day, right?
Mhm.
Everyone else is just not there as often. When they're partnering with teachers to make sure that teachers have the supports, resources, professional development, so that they can make sure every time a kid walks into a classroom, they feel warm, welcome, and supported. That when kids miss school, they feel missed and they know what they missed. That parents know what kids are learning in that classroom every day, so that when the kids miss, they're not wondering whether there's a problem with missing. They know they've missed, and either they got to find a way to support them coming in regularly, or even if they miss school, figuring out a way to make sure their kid catches up. That support of engagement and it's really relationship building, and
Yes. Absolutely.
making sure that, like, the other thing I heard of teachers who do this, they make sure that kids realize that making a mistake is okay. So that kids don't end up feeling, because I'm not sure about this curriculum, or I can't learn, I'm struggling with this concept, that doesn't make them want to stay home. They also make sure that there's resources to teachers. So if there's a kid with a challenge, you have a
Mhm.
counselor, a support person that the teacher can reach out to, so that maybe in the midst of their busy classroom, they can't sit down and find out what's really going on with the kid, but someone else
Absolutely.
could, and then can figure out what are the things that you need as a school to support them. It's when you have health providers working on school campuses and also supporting the teachers, so that they can say to families, oh, so-and-so has a stomach ache, just bring them here. The nurse will take a look and see if they really need to stay home, or whether they should be here. And, oh, you're worried because your kid has asthma? Here's our strategy for making sure your kid with asthma is going to be okay in the classroom. That's the stuff that gives families the belief that school is a place where that's really about their kids' benefit. And when young people experience that, and older kids, for example, it's interesting, career technical education, those career pathways have
Mhm.
so much better attendance
Yeah, they
than
do. Yes.
other
Yep.
programs, because kids get, oh, I know why I'm here, because I'm learning this, because I'm going to get this kind of job. I understand the relevance of what I'm learning to the classroom, but also those classrooms, those pathways tend to have a small set of adults working with a set of kids. So you
Yeah.
develop relationships. You're also connecting kids to peers. And kids are often engaged in something pro-social. We know student connectedness matters. Do I have
Yes.
an adult who I care about? Do I have kids who I can connect with? Am I welcomed? And am I engaged in pro-social work? That gets kids to school.
Because I thought, I was very encouraged that we were gonna education just seems as not as innovative as some of the other things in the country. I thought we were on the cusp of innovation because we were forced to during the pandemic, and just going forward, making sure that we keep innovation and keep students connected to something that and trusted. Like you said, it goes to relationships. Uh, in your historic career, because it is historic, what are some of the things that you're most proud of?
I am most proud, if this is still a work in progress, if we can shift
Mm,
people from a
mm,
blame mindset.
mm,
Oh, Hedy missed school
mm,
because she doesn't care, to
mm,
Hedy missed school, that means we need to engage, reach out, and find out what's going on, because something's amiss. And if we work together and partner with Hedy and her family, we can get her back. And what I've seen is a shift in not everyone. We still have, and I'm really worried about the pandemic, that sometimes there are lawmakers who don't really understand what's going on and they want to take action. So they're trying to like increase punitive action. There is no evidence that
Yes.
punitive action and legal action and taking kids to court improves attendance. What improves attendance is partnering with kids and families to find out what's going on so that then you can address whatever those issues are. And as you know from your home visiting work, it's also not just about doing a single home visit, but aggregating the information so we can look for patterns. Oh, a bunch of kids are on this bus route and that bus route ain't working. Change the bus route. Oh, a bunch of kids don't have a safe path to school, or they don't have access to health care, or they don't have, they don't have any enrichment activities. So what's happening is they're bored and they're not, excited about what's going on. We have to not blame, but seek to understand, and then use that understanding to come up with solutions that start with making sure school's a place where kids want to be.
Absolutely. We're working with this one district, and it took us one time to do a home visit. The majority of their students were coming from this one housing project. The majority of their students who were chronically absent coming from a housing project that was 1.9 miles away. And the policy is if it's 2 miles, if it's under 2 miles, you got to walk to school. Right. And so there was no reliable transportation. And so if it didn't come on time, they just wouldn't come. Like I mean, it's something like that simple. It's less than 2 miles, so they have to. So it's interesting. Hedy, thank you. Thank you for joining. Thank you for the conversation. That story that you started off with really sticks with me. I see it differently, and I appreciate you sharing. Thank you for all the hard work that you've done for going on 2 decades now. I mean, it's been tremendous. You've set the stage and led a lot of the work and the thinking to make sure that districts are doing something to support families. And I just want to applaud you, give you your flowers, and I really appreciate everything that you've done and the groundwork that you've laid and the stuff that you continue to do and bring light on the subjects. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. Another episode of One Door at a Time has wrapped. Look forward to the next episode. As always, I want to thank Atlas Restaurant Group for their generous donation and sponsorship. You can catch them in 38 locations all around Maryland. See you next time. And as always, you can catch us at all of our content on concentric.world. Until next time, I'm your host, David Heiber. Have a great day.